Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Always takes a few moments just to get all the technology all sorted out before we get started. A few weeks ago I was given the opportunity of giving a sermon here, which I was unable to complete because of the length of time running out. And I was given the opportunity to be able to continue where I left off. So for our visitors, we're going to start into the middle of a sermon. It's a bit awkward, so I'll just do a wee recap. What we were talking about is government, how it started, where it came from, and we were showing that government starts with God and finishes with God. But we then began to look at man's government, and in particular we were getting to the point of the first world government that had been established. That's Babylon, as referred to in Daniel 2. So turn with me to Daniel 2 for a moment. This is Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which he couldn't understand. So, the first thing that we noticed here is that when this dream was totally removed out of his consciousness, he was aware of how important it was, he just couldn't recall what it was. Now, I know there's scholars who say, well, he was really testing the wise men. But I don't believe that. I believe that it's what the Bible says, that he actually could not recall what was actually being said. So he gave an order, a very simple order. If you wise men, astronomers, astrologers, Chaldeans, if you sorcerers cannot tell me what I actually dreamt, then really there's not much use in my kingdom. And because you aren't much use in my kingdom, I don't see any point in you being there. And that was an important concept. You see, we must remember that this is a king who understands his own authority. He knows who he is. Now, often the world refers to him, well, shall we say it's not very nice towards him. And he's often looked upon as a tyrant, a dictator, a king that you really, really, really wouldn't like to rule over you. But the interesting thing is that when this dream is revealed to Daniel, God reveals something very, very important. And that is that from God's perspective, this king has the best example of government that man can have. This king is the best example. And it's revealed that he is the head of gold. Now that's where we got to basically up last time when we had to stop. I want to show you now why God felt like that. What was special about this man? Now, I appreciate that a lot of this here that I'm going to share with you, you might not just immediately see in the story of Daniel. But I ask you to bear with me while I try to expound some of these things just a little bit more. First of all, we have to understand where this king came from. The Babylonian Empire and the Assyrian Empire often bumped together, shall we say, as to who had power at what time. This king is coming just at the end of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians had, of course, taken Israel, the 10 tribes as we would know them, away into captivity. And they had established a great power, and they had great authority, and they were able to do as they wanted. Nobody really could challenge them. But they weren't a world power. They weren't a world government. And that's important to understand. Now, in punishment to the Assyrians, God was now handing over their kingdom and everything else to a king who they personally wouldn't have liked. Because they did not see, as I say, eye to eye with the Babylonians. Now, in modern terms, we would have been looking at two particular types of countries if we wanted to bring it up to modern age, and that would be Iraq and Iran. So we can get a picture that there is still that animosity between the two nations, even today. But it's ancient, it's very ancient. Now, Babylon, as we highlighted last week, under Nebuchadnezzar became one of the most beautiful, industrial, powerful cities that ever existed in the world. But one of its strengths, as they saw it, was that they, shall we say, allowed a lot of different religions to be worshipped and honoured. So when they came and they took control of your country, they accepted the fact that your gods had a right to be there. So when they were moving you, the captives, they said, well, bring your gods with you, and we will allow you to worship your gods along with all the rest of the gods in Babylon. And so that's how that concept worked. Now, it worked very well when Nebuchadnezzar's fellow was doing this, and it worked equally well when he was doing it. But things were changing. And this is very important for us to understand. When he became king, Nebuchadnezzar decided he wanted to expand his kingdom. He wanted to know how far he could actually take this kingdom. Now, he had, as we mentioned earlier, many wise men in his particular council. And he would have referred to them and talked to them and discussed them. This was common among many of the kings that would have been of that era, and many of the kings indeed that came afterwards. But what they were actually getting their counsel from was the spirits of the gods of the land. So if you wanted to go, say, and attack Egypt, which this king did want to do, the first thing you do is you find out what the god of Egypt might be saying about this. Will he be agreeable to you coming into his land and overturning it? Or will he fight for the people? Needless to say, in the vast majority of the time, the kings just worked on their own principle, but they always got this account, should they do this or should they not? But when Nebuchadnezzar started to do his research, he come across a strange thing. Everyone was telling him the same thing, and it was this: you are going to be given authority over everywhere. All kingdoms will fall before you. Now, he's an ambitious king, he likes that, that was very good, but you don't get that from every single god that you go and find out about. It's just not done. There's bound to be a difference of opinion. So he does a wee bit of research. He sends out his spies, and guess what he discovers? In Judea, and he's aware of Judea, it's not all that important in the world history, but he's aware of where it is and what's happening. In Judea, there's a prophet. This prophet is called Jeremiah, and his people hate him. And why do they hate him? Because he's talking treason. He is telling the people, he's telling the kings, he's telling all the rulers that a great king is going to be coming, a king from Babylon, and that king is going to be given all the land, and that they should simply not bother fighting them. Surrender now. There's no point going against this king. Now, Nebuchadnezzar's listening to all this information that's coming back, and it's totally confusing him. So he wants to know, where does all this come from? How does this nation of Israel be telling this to its people? Why would this prophet, why would a God literally reject his people? That's basically what he wants to know. And we have to understand that when we go through the book of Jeremiah, God is not holding back as to why he's rejecting his people. Because they don't do what he tells them. They won't follow his precepts. They won't honour him. They won't keep his holy days. And they're out incorporating into their belief structure every type of doctrine that's in the Gentile world. This is why he's doing it. So the king's looking very carefully at this, and he realizes that he's been given the opportunity to come and take this kingdom, and all the rest of the kingdoms are being given to him as well, as a servant of this high God. So he wants to know about this God. Now, as I say, this is something that you have to understand looking at the backstory. He wants to know about this high God. So he does his research. He gets his spies, and he gets his counselors, and he gets everybody else, and he says, how did this God come about? Where did he come from? Where are these people from? What is their history? Just what is their pedigree, basically, is what he's asking them. Now, here's an interesting concept. First thing he learns, well, actually, they all come from a people who originate with us, Babylon. It was a man called Abraham. He left Ur in Babylon, and he was told to go and he would become a great nation. He was chosen to go by a god of his day, who later was revealed to be the Almighty. Now the king would have known who the Almighty was. You see, Babylon had many gods, but there was one God that they did not worship under any circumstance. None of the ancients did, and they had a very good reason why. This God could not be approached. This God hid in heaven. And when he did make an appearance, he brought catastrophe with him. He even destroyed the entire population of the earth in a flood. Think about it. This is a God you don't mess with. So the people didn't mess with him. They didn't worship him, they didn't honour him, they simply avoided him. But they knew his name, the Almighty, the one who lives in heaven. All the rest of the gods live on earth. They live in mountains. They live in forests. They live at streams. They live in the sea. All the rest of the gods live where you can see. They come down from Mount Olympus, for example, or in from the forests, or they'll come up out of the oceans. All these gods they could understand because these gods were part of them. But this God in heaven? No, sorry. He's invisible, but he's powerful. He's the creator of all things. These are all different. Yet it was this God that had formed the Israelites. It was this God that ultimately broke the back of Pharaoh of Egypt and destroyed his entire army. By how? How did he do it? He drowned them in the Red Sea. So, Nebuchadnezzar isn't stupid. He realizes if he goes up against Israel and he gets this God annoyed, there could be consequences. But he's not getting that story. He's been told, no, God's actually in favour of this. So when he goes in his first wave and finds that everything is exactly as he's been told and all kingdoms are literally falling before him, he's not surprised at this. Not really surprised. So he takes some of the captives from Judea, and Jerusalem, and some of the young men who are princes and the best of the best. That's what they did. And he trained them in his own culture, and he wanted to use them as advisors. And it was one of these young men, and one called Daniel, who the king was going to be instructed by a little more about this God. So when he gets this dream, remember we started with this dream. This leads all up to that. When he gets this dream, he realizes that a God is talking to him. And then when he forgets the dream, he feels that he's done something wrong. He feels as if he has done something wrong. But he doesn't realize that all's happening here is that God is giving him a calling card. He's introducing himself to the king. And that's the first thing that we really need to think about here. Our God, the Almighty, the ever-living, the holy, the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, actually wanted a relationship with this king, this first Gentile king. He wanted a relationship with him. And to get that relationship with him, he had to go through a lot of different hoops, because the king wasn't exactly open for discussion. The king had made his mind up. If they can't tell him how and what he dreamt and what it meant, they weren't no use to him. But one man asked for time. He was given the time and he was revealed the dream, and he came to the king and he said to the king, "You, O king, need to know," and it's in verse 28, Daniel 2. "There is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter dream." Daniel then began to explain what the king had saw. We know about the head of gold. The king was very impressed with that. He didn't even consider the rest of it all that much, because that would be after his time. But we need to consider it. We need to understand that God had called this king as a head of gold. He didn't call his sons the head of gold. Babylon was not the head of gold. This king, only this king. But the vision saw something else. The opposite side from the head is the feet. And these feet were totally different from this head of gold. These feet ended with 10 toes, as all feet do. But the toes especially were mixed with iron and clay, mingled with men. That statement has caused people problems over the years when they've tried to understand, what do you mean mingled with men? And as you can understand how history unfolds, we can realise why it would have caused them bother. Because they've never actually realised what it truly would consist of. What does it mean to have a government that is mingled with men? We have a word for it. Very simple word. It's called democracy. You say, well, how long now? Democracy is one of the best governments ever seen. It allows people free expression. It allows people to look after their rights. No, what it does, being honest, what it does is it makes everybody think that they can do whatever's right in their own eyes. That's what it does. That's what democracy does. Democracy first reared its head, I suppose we could say, anciently, in France. That's one of the earliest aspects where I'm able to come across it. No, well, fair enough, you could say, well, there was democracy in Rome, the Greeks had a form of democracy. Yeah, but not as we know it. Their democracy never, ever. Let's consider for a moment. Do you remember in Acts, Paul and Silas were preaching, but they got into a little bit of bother. Certain silversmiths felt that, their teaching was taken away from their living because they made gods to the goddess Diana for all intents and purpose. And they were raising a problem of what the apostles' teaching was doing. Now, as a result of that, now we're not getting off subject here, we're still in government. As a result of that, there was an uproar in the city. And people were taken and brought into the middle of the arena, and there almost like a lynching was going on. And the governing officials of the city were panicking because, and here's what we need to understand, while they had a legal right to air their views in the democracy of Rome, they didn't have a right to unlawful assembly. And that was the problem. The leaders of the city were afraid that Rome could call them to account. And that account could be very fierce. They were worried. And they were rightly worried because the iron of Rome did not allow any clay to get infected in its power. It didn't allow it to work. That's the difference that we have. But we live in a different world. We live in a world where, well, let's be honest. We might have iron, we have governments over the world that are very strong and mighty and have great weapons and technology and could strike an enemy at any time within minutes with devastating results. But most of the time they can't actually use what they want to do. And they can't do it because they have to get agreement. They have to get agreement from the different strands of their governments to be able to do things. Now that can be a safeguard, yes. But we're moving into a time when the government itself isn't the ones making the decisions, it's the actual people. In Northern Ireland here we have a problem. It's called, being Northern Irish I suppose, but being honest, think about this. We have a belief here in Northern Ireland that we live in a democratic country. But our understanding of a democratic country is if I want it, I take it. And if you deny it to me, I'm going to take it anyway. That's not real democratic. It's not real at all in any sense. And we have a situation at the moment concerning a flag. Now, from the world's perspective, as they look at that situation, They're going, what are they on about? Why is there a difference? Why are they annoyed about this flag? What's causing this problem? But they don't understand the situation. The situation is very simple. Children are in power. People who really shouldn't have a say are exercising their authority over the legal authority of the day. Northern Ireland is just one example. In different parts of the world, we see it right across the board. Throughout Europe, in different places where the governments had to make cuts because of austerity aspects and financial difficulties, what do the people do? Do they say, well, we better buckle down and get these things sorted? No, they rise up and they cause havoc. In Egypt, they're rebelling on the streets yet again. Why? Because 2 years ago they had an uprising, the Arab Spring, and what happened? They changed the top of the government of the day. They felt, we don't want you anymore, we don't have to have you, so they successfully managed to overturn it. They elected, fair and square, they elected their new representatives, and guess what? They don't like them either. So what are they doing? They want to change them as well. This is how government is working today. This is the toes. This is what Daniel was shown to the king that would happen in the last days. So what do we learn about government? Well, God's valued the different governments throughout the age by the metals that he cast them in. And he has absolutely no value set on the governments of our era. No value. He acknowledges, yes, they are strong governments. They are strong in the sense they have military means to strike if they need to. But nothing gets done. I was listening to some news last night and I found it interesting that there is a problem currently in Russia, of all places. Do you know what their problem is? They want to put through their parliament a law controlling the availability, I have to see how I say this, of certain types of what they consider propaganda for the gay aspect. They want to control it. They say that should not be able to be seen by children and should not be presented to children. And they wanted to put a law through this. The result is, the first readings went through, but it immediately has sparked a row. And the row is breaking out into the streets, even there in Russia. They are protesting because the people don't feel that they want to have somebody ruling over them. They want to be able to decide for themselves what's right and what's wrong. And that's a problem. Because the moment we go down that road, we deny who government truly comes from. Because you see, government does not come from men, but from God. All government comes from God. Good government and bad government. And that's an important thing because the government of the day are only the figurehead of the true government, which is God. Needless to say, God said within the dream to Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel explains it, that it gets to such a stage that he's going to have to change it. He's going to have to stop man's self-determination. And he does that in a remarkable way. He does it by cutting a stone without hands and casting it at the feet of the great image of man's government. The result is, as the Bible is very clear about, is that entire governmental system crumbles into dust and is blown away in the wind. But the stone will grow and become a mighty mountain that shall cover the entire earth. Do you know, one of the reasons why the nations of the world are going to fight against Jesus Christ at his coming is because they know that he's coming with a rod of iron. They don't want that form of government. And the closest we can get to understanding the sort of government that is coming to this earth is to look at the government, that first government of Nebuchadnezzar. And that sounds strange, because that's the sort of government that's going to fall upon the earth. There won't be any idol worship, no. There won't be any aspect of other gods. All that will be done away with. But we have to understand that as far as God's concerned, when Jesus Christ is returning to this earth, he's establishing a government that will be led from the head down, not guided by the feet. It's a totally different concept. But what about church government? Where do we stand with that? Where do we stand with church government? In the Church of England at the moment, they're about to have a changeover from one leader to another. It always takes time for these little interchanges to happen. But they've also had a problem, because they had hoped to be able to introduce lady bishops. And they see a need for it because they've got ladies who are currently preaching in the pulpit and doing all the rest of the work of the church, but they're not allowing them just to go up the managerial ladder, so to speak. And so they felt this isn't fair. Now, all the government in the Church of England, all the government in the Church of England, are in agreement that it isn't fair and there should be lady bishops. But you see, the government of England, or the government of the Church of England, let's get this straight, have an aspect where the laity, representatives of the members of the church itself, have a say. And that means that every church got to have an input in this. And what did they decide? We don't want it. The people said no. So the government of the church is saying, we want this, but the people are saying, we don't. The result was, they didn't get it. Simple as that. Now, that's the Church of England. We can take any single church body right across the globe and we will find a similar situation. There is a change of spirit happening within even churches. A change of spirit where the individuals on the ground are trying to lead the head, literally. And that's what we see in every church group, in every church gathering. In the Protestant Reformation, that's exactly what happened with the Puritans. They said, we don't want clergy. We don't want a figurehead up there in front who's going to tell us everything that's true. In other words, people like me who are up here preaching, they didn't want that. They wanted to be able to have every individual able to speak at one time as God moved them. And you know, that exists. There is churches out there that work to that form of thinking. But it does have a major problem. And that is, you can end up with total chaos. Total chaos. So, order keeps coming back. Now, the Bible, on the other hand, doesn't support it at all. It says that there has to be order in a church. Everything has to be done decently and orderly. And it lays out how to do that. But on the other hand, the Bible also teaches that the laity, the people who sit down in the seats, are to become actively involved in the proclaiming of the message of Jesus Christ. See, government, from God's perspective, does involve the people. But it's not led by the people. It's led by God. In fact, the easiest and best example of government that we will ever get remains the family. We have here my granddaughter. She's the one that'll be making the noise on the tape. But she's been very quiet today. She's been actually not too bad at all. But she would like to take charge. Oh, I know you are all adults. You don't know this. You don't understand the concept of how children work. But from her perspective, she would love to be in charge of this whole thing. And she would put you in your place. She will tell you what you would do, when you would do it, and now. not later, now. See, even at her age, she understands the concept of government, but she's a dictator. Do you understand? She's a dictator. She's not interested in what you want, she's interested in what she wants. And that's the difference between the two things. As she grows, she'll learn that authority is given as it's required. But what about us? How many of us still work under the principle that maybe we're still 3 years old? That's Phoebe's age. How many of us are spiritually 3 years old thinking, we have to do it our way, we want to get this sorted out from our perspective? Do we do that? Do we push ourselves ahead? Sometimes we do. But it doesn't please God. Now, he's not going to take us and throw us out of the church. If Phoebe decides to make lots of noise, we'll consider it, but only temporarily. The point is, we address it, we talk about it, we gradually bring an individual into line with the church's thinking. But what if the church's thinking is wrong? Then we have to look in a bigger picture. We have to look at what the Bible teaches. We have to look at what is truth and what is lie. And do you know what the biggest difficulty here is? Truth always represents authority and lie always represents rebellion. Always. And so when you hear a lie, when a lie is being manifested, whether up here or down there or anywhere, notice, it's always suggesting that you stand against authority. It always suggests that. Why should we listen to them? Why should we do this? Why should we understand that? Why don't we do it our way? Our way is as good as their way. There's always that spirit. Mischievous, childlike spirit challenging it. When we look at government, we have to realize that we live in a time when children rule over us. No, I don't fully mean from Phoebe's age. I don't mean that 3-year-olds are in government, though it feels like it at times, especially sometimes here in Northern Ireland. But what I do mean is this. If you go to a school, you might discover to your surprise that the teacher doesn't have authority over the children. She only has, shall we say, permission to look after them for a little while. She doesn't have authority. Because she can't say to that child, right, that's it. You, in the corner, stay in the corner, head in the corner, do not move from that until you learn manners. Can't do that anymore. You might think you could, can't. They're even talking about the naughty step as being too restrictive. I'm serious, too restrictive. Phoebe knows about the naughty step. She puts her mother in it regularly. And sometimes her grandma. But all this, you see, revolves around one thing, and that is that the rights of the child is that they have their say. They have their control. So what happens when the child grows up? When the child starts to get older and starts to believe all these lies that are given to it. And it is a lie to think that a child has a right over its parent. That is a lie. A child does not have a right over its parent. A parent has the rights over the child. Could you imagine what happens? And I've seen this. I actually have seen this from a position of being at work and dealing with this sometimes in different times, where a parent wants to move to a different area and the child doesn't want to go. It wants to stay with its friends. It doesn't want to go home. Head off to another country and have to deal with all that hassle. Now, normally, this isn't a problem. But in some cases, the legal rights of the child can be more important than the parents, and the child can be allowed to stay if it so wants. You should say, what, 3? Generally, no. But at 13 or 14, look at this here, folks. It just fell. Preschool. What am I talking about? Sorry about that, camera. Where were we? We were on about schools and different things, and then that opened up, just to give us a hint that we are talking about different schools and different things. The rights of the child is being promoted right across the social sector within Western governments, democracy, shall we say, within the democratic countries aspect. But it is working more of this clay into government, because as it is bringing across their rights, it's eroding the rights of the parent to control the child and to teach the child and to, where necessary, correct the child. You see, the Bible says that if you don't correct the child appropriately, you're going to hate it. And do you know how many people in Northern Ireland, shall we say, who actually hate their children? It would surprise you. And do you know why they hate them? They can do nothing with them. They can't talk to them. They can't have a meal with them. The children will go and eat in a different room, if they eat at all. The children lead everything. Why? Because no correction. Now I want to ask you something. And I want you to be really thinking about this. From God's perspective, you are His children. From time to time, you misbehave. What do you want God to do? Do you want Him to let it go, forget about it, and you shall grow out of it? Or do you want Him to come and discipline you? Do you want Him to love you enough to say, I do not want to lose a relationship with you? Do you want Him to love you enough to say, I do not want you to ruin your life, and therefore we're going to deal with some of these problems and difficulties now? God loved Israel just like that. He loved them enough to want to give them life. Do you know how He did it? He disciplined them. He brought a Gentile king against them. When Judah followed Israel, he did the exact same thing. He brought another Gentile king, but this time he meant business. And He hasn't changed how He works. We are His children. We are the ones that are important to Him. If we don't obey Him, if we decide we know better and follow our own hearts as to how we worship Him and how we approach Him and whether we take on all what the world has given us, and believe me, the world's given us a lot of stuff. Do you know, one of the hardest things for me individually, I'm 54 years old, folks, just to let you know that. At my age, one of the hardest things for me was to realize that as I was brought up, I was never actually taught to respect authority. I was never taught to respect it. And because I wasn't taught to respect it, it doesn't affect me having a relationship with, if I meet the police, I can be nice and calm with them, or if I meet somebody that has authority, I can be nice with them and all the rest. That doesn't have a problem. But the thing is, I don't see them as, having great power. I know they're only people. But where it really affected me was when I realized I had this relationship with God. Because I realized, how do you actually interact with authority if you don't know anything about authority? See, for me, the only way I can understand God is from a friendship aspect. Christ is my elder brother. He's family. My father is his father because I'm adopted into his family. I can understand that. I can understand the parental concept. But I can't understand the king concept. I still can't understand the king concept. Why? Well, let me put it this way. People who went through the war, shall we say, have a very good understanding of authority. They understand that they were given orders, you did it then, and that's it. They experienced that. But the generations that came after that didn't have the same teaching, they didn't have the same understanding. The rebellion, you see, that I'm talking about, where the children started to rule, was my era. My era. Just after World War II. And it's got worse. And it will continue to get worse. And I want to tell you, God is going to have to do something about it. But this world will not want him to come. It won't. And it's going to resist him on every way it can. You think that we should be evangelizing? Think maybe that revival should be encouraged in the church? You're not going to see revival. You're not. Do you know why? Because the people do not have a heart of believing there is anything more powerful than them. We live at a time when people do not believe in the sovereignty of God. They don't exist. He doesn't exist to them. They say, well, there might be something out there. But they don't realize that he is. Everything we have is based on the reality that God is. And do you know how much the enemy is putting into eroding or trying to erode that reality? Trying to challenge us at every point. In these last days, it's not a case of mighty works. The mightiest works will be that you still have faith. That's what the mightiest work is going to be. That you still believe that God is before Jesus Christ comes back. And I want to tell you, it is my solemn belief that we are in those days now, because I see the evidence of it everywhere I turn and everywhere I look. We are in the toes of man's government. People are mingled in every aspect of it. And the only response that God has left is to destroy the whole thing and establish the kingdom of Jesus Christ. With that,